Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm from airwindows, and I am bringing something a little unusual to the industry here, and it is inspired by Neil Young's project Pono. It's called Righteous. Righteous is essentially a mixed bus for use with Pono, and it's to be used in very specific ways. I can show you a couple of things about it, and then tell you more about it. Essentially, for starters, here, let's hear a bit of a drum sound. You'll find that this is very bright and spiky and stuff. That is a very exaggerated drum sound, and it's all about the hi-hat, and that hi-hat is good and obnoxious. If I turn on Righteous, you will find that the high frequencies continue to be pretty much what they were, but the glare goes away. It is a cure for digital glare that you can just put on the end of your bus. Also, the low frequency will bloom and the overall resolution will improve because it includes a unusual sort of dither that draws on Benford realness algorithms and a type of low frequency bloom that I'll be showing you more about later. Here, listen to what this does. Suddenly more three-dimensional. We'll go back and forth a little bit. And back on. The purpose of this is to be able to run mixes, properly constructed mixes, into Righteous and have it always come out sounding good on the output. It should be a little bit more resilient than your usual digital bus. There's also another thing about it. That deglare algorithm is not tied to frequencies, it is tied to the sample rate. What that means is this is at 44.1K. 44.1K is actually a very good way of, I'm not sure if I can demonstrate that off the top of my head. I ran some tests and found that when I was testing for noise floor, I was getting better noise floor in the mid-range where your ear is most sensitive at a lower sample rate. And when I kicked it up to a higher sample rate, even something like 96K, I started losing some of that resolution. And it started getting eaten up by basically processing noise. It's basically digital processing noise causing this. So there are many wonderful things about Pono, and there are some things that I'm not as sold on, namely the 192K. But the great thing about it is that you get to do whatever you want, and that is very much the same thing with Righteous. In that Righteous is designed so that if you don't like that, the deglare here, I'll show that again, and then without it, and then with it. All you got to do is run your project at a higher sample rate, and the deglare will scale up to cover higher frequency ranges, because at higher sample rates you can get away with more highs without it producing digital glare. So it basically calibrates itself to the type of recording that you're making and the types of sound you're putting into it. Now this is going to come as a bit of a shock, possibly. I have here a sine wave that is feeding into my reverb space, and you'll hear it now. Hear that? Note that it is not at a very loud volume. You're hearing a digital space, digital reverb in there. And then that sample thing is not very loud. That's part of the point of Righteous. And that should be part of the point of Pono. Listen to what happens when I turn righteous on and apply it to this sound, this test sound. Now again, I'll shut the bypass off, and we'll hear that again. Not as easy to pick out, is it? Whole thing's a little flatter. Whole thing's a little less three-dimensional. And now, we turn righteous on, and righteous fills in some of the space and bloom and dimensionality that you used to get from things like tube consoles and tape. Righteous is designed to replace some of the heavy overprocessing that we have to do on digital. And that goes so far as to replace things like fake tape, including my own to tape. It replaces things like it most distinctly replaces things like limiters and clippers and stuff like that, because my notion is that Pono should be a way of expressing high-resolution music with the full dynamic range and spaciousness that we used to have in released music. The best music of history in terms of long-term sales and evergreen sales, and I've studied this, some people know I've studied this. The best music of history, such as classics like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors and so on, Boston's first album, was initially released on vinyl records that had extremely high crest factor. You see what this says, that minus 24 dB? And that we have sounds coming around through here, and it's filling up a range, but it's only about 20 dB down there. That is more or less what you would used to get off of vinyl records. People formed emotional attachments to this music that came out at a certain time where they were not peak limiting stuff nearly as hard as they do now. They compressed stuff like crazy. The body of the music would be squashed down and made more smooth, and that was very much a thing with Boston's first album, and all of Boston's albums really. But these processes don't necessarily smack the peaks of the music down, and that is where the aura, and that is where the personality, and that is where the parts that we care about of music reside. When you have a performer who is really laying it out there, or a singer who is really projecting, the RMS output, the body of the sound that they produce, is probably going to be about the same, but the peak energy can go sky high, can fly completely beyond what they would otherwise do, and that is the overtones that you get. That is the sort of what makes the hair stand up in the back of your neck. Pono should encourage this. Pono should encourage this type of behavior, and for that reason, Righteous is designed to encourage that behavior as well. Mix into Righteous, and you can do things like put a like that there. You can put a 2-bus compressor on there if you like. No reason you shouldn't. You can have your 2-bus compressor, you can have your normal mix going into things, but what you do after that is you throw out your fake tape, because Pono is very high resolution. People will be able to hear it, even if you have very high quality, and I think mine is very high quality fake tape. you don't necessarily want to go for the colorations of audio tape. What you want to do is have the low frequency bloom, and you want to have some of the behaviors of this stuff in a controlled way, in a way that you can do with digital means. That's what Righteous is for. Again, we're going to be going into the compressor. This should be interesting. We've got like your frequencies going through here. I can even turn it up a little bit and you can hear it hitting the compressor. And then we turn Righteous on, and suddenly we can hear what the low frequency space is doing. But as you push it harder, and particularly if we turn off this compressor so it's forcing it to push it harder, you shouldn't push stuff into Righteous too hard. Like this is peaking out at that's peaking out at loud and squeaky noises, pardon me. It's peaking out at about 6 dB or so. You can push it up to, well, technically with certain sounds, like for instance if we turn on the drum kit again, we can push it pretty loud. But you don't want to push it so hard that you hear it actually breaking up. You want it to keep some space. Here's something that I can do while we're fooling around demonstrating stuff is I always endorse these guys. Vox and Go Span. Vox and Go Span is wonderful stuff. What you can do is set this up so that it is a density mode, is what they call this. And what density mode does is it shows these as colors, and if you're mixing into Righteous, you want the colors to stay mostly in the green and maybe go up to the red for hard dynamic hits and use the range properly. So if we bring this up, you can see that it's starting to push stuff hard, and you can also see that it's not a peak limiter. We are, in fact, clipping the output, and that's because you're not supposed to be using it as a peak limiter. Righteous will audibly break up if you're pushing it too hard. You don't want to be pushing it, I'm pointing to this thing with my finger, so that stuff sits around. Modern recordings will sit around so that the density mode is going to have stuff sitting around there in the oranges and the reds almost all the time. And this is not what you want. This is not what you want for stuff to be listened to intentionally, for stuff that you appreciate and like, for stuff that people care about. It's just a unintentional and unpleasant phenomenon of the music business trying to compete to get into places like Walmart or whatever, or get on the radio, which is not really a thing anymore. And Pono produced millions of dollars of pre-sales by offering to be something different. As such, Righteous is a tool designed for encouraging this different behavior. If you are making music and intending it to go to Pono, you do not need to put on peak limiting. You do not need to compete with other people's recordings on CDs and stuff that have only 16 bits to deal with, and they always have to be a little bit flat and cardboardy, so you might as well make it thick and slam really hard. And no, you don't have to do that anymore. If you're mixing to Pono, you can construct dynamics that are as huge as you want. You can emphasize the super low bass in a way that you can't do with the super, with the CDs and modern releases. And you can hear that very plainly by my little demo of fooling around with the lows like this. And then you turn on Righteous, and suddenly it's a live, full thing. It's filling up a lot of space. and you can track it. You can follow what the low bass is doing. And you can construct a mix in such a way that it balances out and covers the full range, and it covers the full dynamic range. It can go from quiet, and you can actually have quiet, very quiet at 24-bit, to extremely loud. You can really do what you want with mixes using Pono as a different kind of sound output and using Righteous as the output stage. I'd like to think the ideal output stage for going to Pono. It doesn't have noise such as you would get with tape or fake tape, other than the fact that the low, put it this way, digital audio, such as in Logic, is 32-bit floating point output. Now, the processing inside airwindows plugins is processed at 64-bit floating point, but then I continually reduce stuff to 32-bit using a kind of noise shaping. So I essentially dither to 32-bit. And then when you go to an output format, such as WAV or AFF or FLAC, typically you'll go to an uncompressed format and then go to FLAC. You're probably going to 24-bit. As such, it should be dithered. Just because you're going to 24-bit doesn't mean you can just truncate it as if you were going to CD quality and just running directly out of it to it should be dithered to 24-bit, and Righteous includes a particular kind of dither that is also available in my DitherBox plugin. But Righteous includes that. It's built in the naturalized dither to 24-bit, which uses Benford realness calculations to produce believable sound that has a natural quality and doesn't feel digital at all. That's the whole idea of the purpose. And it's really plain to hear. It's very plain to hear. We can turn on the old sine wave here and the test oscillator. And there it is without it. And all we got to do is turn on Righteous. Not only can you hear it very loud and clear, but the distance of the reverberation, it feels more distant, it feels more natural. Turn off Righteous and the whole thing feels a lot less real. At a stroke. Turn it back on. And you're good. My hope is that by selling Righteous, and Righteous is an audio unit that costs $50, and it runs on PowerPC Macs and 32-bit Intel Macs and 64-bit Intel Macs for things like Logic or Ableton Live, or for anything that runs audio unit should run this. My hope in putting out Righteous for $50 is that people will gravitate towards it, use it as their output stage, as their final dither, and as their final rounding of the low end and handling of the aggressive highs if there are any in the mix. And they will use that not to try to emulate what is done with CDs and MP3s and stuff, not to try to emulate the way to slam stuff and make it sound better. Don't slam this bus. Righteous is not to be slammed. It's not designed to sound good being slammed. It's designed to have stuff sitting there basically in the green, a good 18 dB or so down in RMS in general, and allowing the peaks to push higher than that, and constructing a mix that feels bigger, it feels rounder, and something that people will have to turn up in order to listen to the way it's meant to be heard. Because we can't keep going with this loudness-oriented bad digital audio. We can't keep going. There's a reason that Pono has sold so much before it's even come out. People are hungry for stuff that actually sounds good like they used to, And this is not simply a nostalgia thing. That stuff sounded better because it was mixed differently and constructed differently, and it used dynamic range differently than anything does these days. If you have something that is mixed for Pono, and you put it on immediately next to something that is mixed for CD and MP3 and YouTube and blah blah blah, it should sound strikingly different. It should sound much quieter. It should sound less bright. Although the people who are doing high frequency emphasized stuff for Pono with the 192K or 96K, they might very well get along with having stuff sound a lot brighter, and that'll be fine. But for a lot of cases, I would think that it should seem a lot quieter, less bright, less in your face, so much so that it's obvious it needs to be treated differently. And that is the idea behind Righteous. That is the purpose of Righteous, and the reason I'm putting it out. And I'm even putting out some music that I'm finally getting into doing some of that. I'm taking my own little music into the market there, but because Pono is my opportunity for saying, I like music to be like this. No, I'm not going to peak limit it. I'm not going to clip it. It's not about making it be louder than the next guy. It's about, like, I used to listen to Amagama by Pink Floyd. Love that album. It sounds huge. It has space inside it. You have to listen into it. It doesn't come forward at you. The guitar comes forward at you sometimes, but that's different. Music should get to sound like that again. It's not just old-fashioned. There are things about it that are better. Louder and newer isn't necessarily better. Pono is our opportunity to go for stuff like this. Righteous is my opportunity to try to support Pono and push it in the direction that I think it should go. And I hope it works. Anyhow, that's what I'm going to be doing. So pick up a copy of Righteous for $50 if you are using audio units on a Macintosh, and let's see what people do with it. I'd really like to see some of the things that people would do with full, lush, rich bass like there used to be, and airy highs that don't sound plastic or tinny, and the full range of dynamics, meaning that you can have low frequencies, or you can have a band come together and just kick. I'd like to see what people would do with that. We haven't had that for many, many, many years. And this is my way of trying to encourage it. Thanks.